Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Unique Self and Societal Development, the Path of Societal Transformation, which is the Part 3 session of the 3-part web series titled The Next Step in Transformation, Unique Self, Organizational Leadership, and the Destiny of Nations with Richard Barrett and Marc Gafni. Hi, my name is Jessica Brown, and I am the leader of Network Services and Development at Barrett Value Center, and I'll be facilitating the call today. And we also have Richard Barrett and Marc Gafni on the call. Hi, Richard and Marc.
Hi,
Hello.
Jessica.
Hey, Jessica.
Hey.
Great to be here with you.
Great. So we're all here together today in order for Richard and Marc to share their latest thinking and technologies for transforming self, which is the first step of any kind of transformation. As a part of this series, it's showing how personal transformation, organizational transformation, and societal transformation are driven by the same core principles, and how the application of these principles leads to transformative change. And in the last 2 parts of the series, we were focused on personal transformation and then on organizational transformation. And today's focus is on societal transformation. So today will involve listening to Marc and Richard share their thoughts, listen to them in dialogue with each other, and also Q&A and experiential pieces where everyone can be involved in relating to the material and also talking with Marc and Richard about their thoughts. So first we're going to hear from Marc to kind of set the tone for the call, and then Richard, and then we will break into the discussion part of today's call, and then we will open up for experiential exercise and then Q&A afterwards. So before we get started, just like to cover some basic logistics so that we can have the most effective call. During the first part of the call, during the call we will have you unmute. This is because we've noticed that even the slightest noises can be really distracting and come through the microphone pretty strongly. So we're going to keep you on mute unless you're speaking. So during the Q&A part of the call, we will unmute you when you are speaking. And when we're at that point, open for questions and comments, you'll be able to raise your hand by pressing the number 1 on your telephone keypad, and we'll be able to unmute you while you're speaking then, and I can remind you of that part later. And if you do have your participant dashboard open, it would be helpful for you to refresh it so that you can see any messages or updates coming through so that you're able to view that. We also would like to encourage you while you're getting settled into the call right now to clear away any distractions. There's always a lot of things open on our computers and our phones are nearby, but we've really found that we can have a much more meaningful conversation when everyone's focused at the present topic at hand. We also want to make sure that you have a pen and paper handy for the experiential exercise portion of the call today. And if you don't have that yet, it would be helpful to grab that right now. If you need any technical support during the call, you can use the chat message box on the participant dashboard. And if you don't have that open, you can always press the number 5 on your telephone keypad, and some help will come your way. So I'd just like to quickly introduce Richard and Marc, and then we can get started. So Richard is an author, speaker, and social commentator on the evolution of human values in business and society. He's the founder and chairman of the Barrett Value Center and an internationally recognized thought leader on values, culture, leadership, and consciousness. He's the creator of the internationally recognized cultural transformation tools, which are currently used in 60 countries to support more than 3,000 organizations and leaders in their transformational journeys. And Richard is the author of many books, including his latest book, which is What My Soul Told Me, A Guide to Soul Activation. and the values-driven organization Unleashing Human Potential for Performance and Profit is due out this summer. So thank you, Richard. And then we also have Dr. Marc Gafni, and Marc is a philosopher, public intellectual, and wisdom teacher. He holds his doctorate in philosophy from Oxford University and rabbinic certification from the chief rabbinate in Israel, as well as private rabbinic ordination. He also is ordained and holds a doctorate in religious science. He's the initiating thought leader together with Ken Wilber of world spirituality based on integral principles, as well as the leading theorist and teacher of unique self-enlightenment. Dr. Marc Gafni is the director of Center for World Spirituality, which is a think tank he co-founded in 2010 with Mariana Kaplan. And he's the author of 8 books, including the national bestseller Soul Prince and The Mystery of Love. And his most recent books are Your Unique Self, The Radical Path to Personal Enlightenment, which received a 2012 USA Best Book Award. And his other latest book is Radical Kabbalah. So thank you, Marc and Richard, for being here. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jessica, for that wonderful framing and introduction and setting the stage. Richard, it's a delight to be with you, sir.
I'm here and ready to go.
Ready to go. So let me just, everyone, since Jessica asked me to begin in setting the stage, what I'll do is I'll talk for a few minutes and Richard will talk for a few minutes, just kind of giving our opening thoughts on the topic. Let me, slightly reframe the topic to just kind of give it a little bit of a direction. So we're talking about personal transformation. That was the first dialogue. The second dialogue, organizational transformation. And the third dialogue, the transformation of society, transformation of a nation, if you will. And another way to frame that, right, an entry point, is really through a particular pivoting point, perhaps the pivoting point of transformation, which is unique self, particularly an individual awakening to their unique self, right, to their irreducible expression of love intelligence and love beauty that incarnates in that person, or if I can speak in second person, in you, as you, and through you, that never was, is, or will be ever again, which invites you, right, to give your unique gift, which emerges from your irreducibly unique perspective, which is your essence, which is the great invitation and responsibility, your unique ability to respond to the unique needs, unique invitations of your life. That's what unique self means. And when we say there's the unique self of a person, right, Richard and I are not talking about their egoic typology. We're talking about what Richard might call their soul typology, what I'm calling your unique self, but we're referring to the same thing. We're referring to that irreducible expression of essence, right? The personal quality of essence that's not before the impersonal, but it's not before liberation, right, in kind of classical enlightenment categories. It's after the impersonal. It's the personal beyond the impersonal. It is that personal quality of the infinite, right, that lives in you, as you, and through you. It's love in action expressed as you. And then we went on in the second week to look at, and this is really a kind of a breakthrough for us, and we hope it's a contribution, right, that's significant, the unique self of an organization. To actually recognize that a corporation, an organization itself has a unique self. And actually myself and John Mackey and Richard, together with Ken Wilber, will all be working on a chapter in a larger book that Ken and I are doing on world spirituality, which will be its own white paper, on this unique self of a corporation, which is a highly significant idea, which becomes a strange attractor in corporate life, right? What is our unique self? How do we engage, right, the awakened embodiment of purpose? And how does that purpose express through core values, right, transform, right, the life of a company, making the company not only, right, a better place to work, right, which just completely transforms employee engagement, right, not only, a place that, operates from a deep sense of mission, right, but makes the company, as a function of those two and many other factors, right, a highly, highly effective, right, competitive, right, appropriately contributing organization, right? And when an organization is living its unique self, then as a byproduct of unique self, profit results. Just like when a human being's living their unique self, as a byproduct of unique self, happiness, joy results, right? And the cultural entropy that the Barrett system measures so brilliantly in so many places around the world begins to shift and to transform and to evolve into this kind of major moment of cultural evolution. Now, our third week, we're looking at the unique self of a nation. And we're actually seeing the unique self of a nation, again, like as the pivoting point for transformation. So I want to try and just talk for a few moments here about what we mean when we talk about the unique self of a nation, because for many people that idea is so foreign, right, and even, frightening to a certain degree. Right? When we talk about the unique self of a nation, we think of, the old shadows of a xenophobic nationalism, right? We think of, the old shadows of fascism. We think of the old shadows of Mother Russia, right, in her negative. We think of kind of, a kind of negative British colonialism. We think of a kind of, redneck, wrong part of Texas, American kind of patriotism, which is ethnocentric, right? We think of, the tragedy, right, of German nationalism. We think of the French-British wars, right? We think of all of the tribal wars in Africa, right? All of the great and tragic bloodlettings in Asia. We think of Japan and China, right, in their great wars, right? And so when we begin to talk about the unique self of a nation, right, there's a part of us, the part of us that is a global citizen, right, that feels in some sense that we live in a particular place, but we're actually are global citizens in a genuine way, right? Why are Richard and Marc talking about nations? And aren't we past that? And so I want to begin to really address that, because what we actually know in history, right, is that the single most effective agent, right, of the evolution of consciousness, of social transformation, right, of the embodiment of the highest ethics, right, of the good, the true, and the beautiful in a broad societal context has actually been the nation-state, the democratic nation-state. The democratic nation-state, right, has been, as the political philosophers have pointed out, and Edmund Burke is a good place to start the conversation, right, has been the single most effective form, right, of societal evolution and transformation. And we would do well to remember that, and that actually the vision of a world spirituality, or the vision of a world polis, right, the vision of a global commons, right, is not the vision, right, which transcends and excludes the nation-state. It's not about a dissociation from the idea of a nation-state. It's about the nation-states coming together, right, in what Richard, I'm sure, will talk about, in his scheme, in your scheme, talking about you in the third person, Richard, the third stage of evolution, is when actually these different nation-states that have achieved a genuine internal stability come together, right, and organize with each other in a larger vision. But what the vision is, the emergence is, this new emergent moment is when we actually become dual citizens. We're actually citizens of our people, of our country, right, of our nation state, and also at the same time, citizens of the world. Now, that now brings us to the core of the conversation. Well, why? Why is a nation state important, right? Why don't we just leave nation states behind? Why have nation states succeeded in making a contribution? And why at the same time is there all this shadow that I pointed to in the beginning of the conversation of nation states kind of being lost in their ethnocentricity, right, and going to war to defend, their ostensible honor or boundaries. And so here we need to really kind of step into the notion of the unique self of a nation. Meaning, right, a nation state, right, has a unique self, and it has something particular to contribute. it has a particular perspective. It's got a particular cultural set of gifts. It's got a particular cultural patrimony and a particular cultural inheritance. And by cultural, I mean its insight, its skill, right, its texture, right, its spirituality, right, its ethics, right, just like every great religion, right, has a unique instrument to play, right, in the symphony of spirit. So every nation, right, has a unique instrument to play, right, in the great symphony of culture, and out of the diversity, right, emerges, right, this gorgeous cacophony of music. Now, what happens is when a nation doesn't access its unique self, when it doesn't engage, now sometimes a nation has a unique self naturally, that it's received in inheritance, and in other times a nation might have to kind of come together and do a kind of national purpose search, right, just like a company, right, needs to do, a corporation might need to do, right, in midlife. You know, our colleague, Richard's and my colleague, who we met actually at the same conclave where we met each other, Sally Jewell, who's I think now actually the Secretary of Interior, Richard. It must have been because she met us, right, of the United States, who was the CEO of REI, you know, describes a purpose search that they did in the middle of REI's history, REI being a major outdoor corporation in America, one of the largest, you know, corporations that sells outdoor goods, and they did a purpose search to determine what is REI, why do we exist. So a nation, right, a nation state, also needs to kind of do that purpose search, which actually transforms what it means to be a nation today. Why is there Bhutan? Right? What is the United States? What are its principles? Right? And you go back to the founding documents. Then you work on evolving the founding documents. Great Britain today is something very different than it was 100 years ago. What's the unique contribution of Great Britain, right, to the symphony of culture in the world? What is France contributing? Right? Italy, right? You know, every nation, right, state in the world needs to ask itself that question, and by asking itself that question, it actually awakens to its unique self. It's actually energized, right? It actually has for the first time, right, if you will, a charter, right, a vision, a mission statement, which actually acts as a major and profound countervailing force, right, to cultural entropy. And finally, last sentence, and then with delight, you know, Richard, to pass to you, right, I really want to kind of get clearly from a completely different perspective for a moment, and Richard and I touched on this yesterday, you know, kind of the deep lived truth of this notion that a nation's not an accident. No nation emerges accidentally. Right? Nations emerge from very different sources, sometimes brutally, sometimes through a profound process of liberation and ethics, and sometimes through processes that are less than liberated. But when a nation emerges, it's because there are forces in history, right? There are forces in reality itself that are birthing this into the world. And whether it was birthed in holiness, if you will, right, or birthed in some process that was less than free, right, it still has the ability, right, to reclaim and to evolve itself, right, to claim its unique place in the world. And if you look for a second at molecular biology, and just think, everyone listening on the phone, all of us, myself, Richard, you know, the 7 or 8 people in who are kind of in different staff positions, right, leadership positions, you know, the many, many people on the phone, right? Just think now in the second as you're listening, as I'm talking, you know, step into your own molecular biology, right, and feel into, right, the 50 trillion cells that are moving, right, in your body uniquely in this moment, right, and then feel into, right, the million billion neural pathways, synapses, right, that are at play in this moment, and feel the infinite, intricate complexity, right, of dazzling gorgeousness that makes science fiction look like child's play that's happening and holding you in the second, and you get a sense, right, of the core wisdom, right, what quantum mechanics calls information that precedes energy, right, that births energy, which really is energy, which really is matter. And you realize that everything happening in this moment right now has such an infinite level of care, attention, precision, and detail happening in your body in this moment right now. You begin to realize that's what an organism is, right? And that level of caring, presence, right, infinite holding doesn't end at the edge of molecular biology. It exists not only within us, it exists between us. as individuals. It exists, right, as organizations emerge, and exists as nations emerge. Right? Nations are embedded, right, if you will, in this larger molecular cultural biology. There's no accidents. And so for a nation to ask itself, what is, right, my unique self, right, is, right, actually the true birth of a nation. So that's kind of as a setting, an introduction to the conversation, Richard, and with delight, over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Mark. That was brilliant. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I want to start at a slightly different place and then come together with you. I want to start with the idea that the evolution of consciousness, the psychological evolution of consciousness of an individual, which are the 7 stages: the surviving, the conforming, differentiating, individuating, self-actualizing, integrating, and serving, that those 7 stages are actually a fractal of the whole of evolution as far as Homo sapiens is concerned. So our nations are going to go through those same 7 stages of development as our organizations do. And what we've been doing over the past 15 years is we've been measuring that for individuals, we've been measuring it in organizations, and now we've measured it in 26 different nations. Now the point, I think, here about the unique self, or let me call it the soul of a nation, is that you only begin to activate that soul or that unique self, that unique contribution, when you get to a level of internal cohesion where each of the entities within that make up the organization or the nation are themselves finding a sense of internal cohesion. And at that moment, the unique self of the organization or the nation becomes readily apparent. So, yes, I'm looking at a nation as having an ego personality, and Marc talked about the shadow aspect of that, but also as having a soul too. And where we are right now in terms of evolution is that most of the nations on the planet right now are struggling to get to what I would call the individuation stage. They've learned how to survive. There's a relatively good level of conforming, perhaps because it's an ethnocentric nation, and people are finding ways to be able to excel and the nation hang together in a cohesive way in terms of order, etc. And then comes the next stage, really, which is, I would call it the individuation stage in an individual, but actually in a nation, we could call it something like democracy. Only I want to be careful here. I'll explain why in a moment, but this 4th level of consciousness, democracy, where people all begin to have a voice and we move from the highly controlling and authoritarian leaders into a more dispersed governance system. This represents that level of individuation in the 7 levels of consciousness model. But in order to get to the point where we actually, the unique soul of the nation becomes totally apparent, we have to go beyond that individuation stage to the self-actualization stage. Now, as I said, most nations on the planet are still operating, if you like, at the level of their ego development. They're operating at the first 3 levels of consciousness. Some nations are moving up to level 4, and even just 1 or 2 are moving to level 5. But I want to speak about that for a moment because I've got some very interesting data that we've just put together, which suggests that that democracy in the Western world is in deep trouble. Well, that's not my data. That's been apparent for some time, and social researchers have been observing that. But it is true, and it's also true from the data that I've got, that Western democracy is in deep trouble. And why do I say that? Because we've been mapping the values of several of the Western nations for some time now, over the last 4 or 5 years, and what we see is levels of cultural entropy, which is the degree of dysfunction in the nation, the degree of disconnection And that's the opposite of internal cohesion. The degree of disconnection is like 50 or 60%. And what happens in those nations is we have civil unrest. Iceland got to that point and went bankrupt. So we have several nations now at that level in the 50% of the USA, France, Italy, United Kingdom. These are well-developed democracies which are beginning to fail in a way in delivering what they need to deliver. Now, I've just put together we've mapped the values in Sweden for the past 5 years, and we've seen the level of cultural entropy in Sweden move from 2009 at 31%, which is relatively low to come with some of these other countries. It moved up to 47%. And so Sweden, which we felt was already advancing towards that level 5, that unique self, that soul activation of a nation, is actually going backwards. And the question is, why? What is wrong with this democracy? What is failing us? Especially when you look at, for example, 2 countries we've mapped the values of in the past year, the United Arab Emirates and 3 or 4 years ago, Bhutan. The United Arab Emirates has a level of cultural entropy of 12%. It's a highly cohesive nation. Bhutan is even more cohesive. It has a level of cultural entropy of 4%. Highly, highly cohesive, and yet neither of these countries are democracies. But what I would say about these 2 countries is that they are living democratic values. And therefore, the conclusion that I've come to, and I've mapped this data, is it isn't so much that democracy delivers this freedom. It does. But you can actually have this sense of internal cohesion delivered through highly enlightened leaders. And that is absolutely true in organizations. And I just wonder why it's taken me so long to figure it out. It can also be true for nations. And so I just want to stop at that point, because here's a real conundrum. The conclusion that I come to is that we're lacking the leadership in our democratic nations. When I look at what's happening in the UK, I mean, every month there's a scandal. We've had one this month around 3 of the lords selling privileges to get people so they can get access to highly influential people in government. So we've got the leaders who are operating at the lowest levels of fear-driven consciousness. And I compare that to some of the other nations which are operating with much lower entropies, and you don't see that. It's not so prevalent. So I'm beginning to wonder if what in fact we've done in our democracies is create a new elite who are operating still out of their own self-interest. And the people in the nation see that. And when we ask them, pick 10 values about how your nation is operating, what they see is high levels of cultural entropy. Let me stop there, because I feel like this is a staging point on this conversation, because we're at a trying to get to a level of understanding which, we're not there yet, and this is why we're having these exploratory dialogues. Over to you, Marc.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I mean, this is those are so many things to think about, and this is really, in some sense, where the conversation gets exciting. And really to share with everyone on the call, these really are exploratory conversations, as opposed to kind of full presentations. So let's kind of be in this together, and let me kind of explore a couple things with you here. So when democracies are founded, right? Democracies are founded, based on a kind of post-Hobbesian, Hobbes, Locke, that whole world of continental philosophers, who, elucidate and articulate the notion of a social contract. And a social contract means, just to restate it for all of us, right, even though many of us have done a lot of work with it, a social contract means that the core reality, the core monad of reality, if you will, right, is the individual. Well, the individual is the person who's invested with rights, with inalienable rights, right? And of course, the social contract emerges out of, 1,000 years in Europe and, of kingship, the divine right of kings, right, in which, the human being, right, is defined, largely in terms of their larger context, and then, there's the beginning of an emergence from that with the Magna Carta in 1215, but really in the Renaissance is when the self really emerges, as a kind of absolute given. I mean, it's rooted deeply in Homo imago Dei, in the biblical tradition of the human being created in the image of God and having irreducible value. But, that didn't become expressed as a kind of common truth politically. It didn't become a political truth, right, until post-Renaissance, until the Western Enlightenment. And the word self actually only appears in the Western dictionary for the first time, in the Renaissance. So along comes social contract. And social contract says, okay, we've finally claimed the irreducible dignity of the individual, but we need to live together. As Hobbes says, we're in a natural state of war with each other. So how do we live together? Well, we make a social contract. And the social contract means that we give up a dimension of our rights, right, in order to create a government, right, that then in turn protects our rights. And I think, Richard, it seems to me that that's the core both of the beauty and of the problem, right? So at a certain moment in history, when we were moving past, despotic states, feudal states, where the king and the state were the only real reality, right? We needed desperately for the evolution of consciousness, right, to have the individual emerge, and every one of us on this phone call, but our entire lives are based on that premise, and our entire lives are based on inheriting the enormous, and gorgeous pleasures of being, an irreducibly dignified individual, in a political context that recognizes that. And anyone who grew up, in communist Russia, right, or Poland, knows the difference. So it's a big deal. Having said that, and now that we've attained this level of the irreducible individual, maybe what needs to happen is, right, democracies, nation-states need to now re-examine what their purpose is for existence. Right? Is our purpose for existence merely the social contract? That's what it necessarily was, let's say, for the first 200 years in the United States. The social contract rules the basic structure of government in Europe as well today. But maybe we need now to actually have, and I think that's what you're pointing towards, what you're kind of alluding to, we need to actually have an evolution of consciousness, right, in what the very purpose, right, of a nation-state is. And that maybe it needs to move beyond social contract to what we're calling the soul of a nation or the unique self of a nation. Now, of course, this evolution of consciousness, like all evolutions of consciousness, right, is rooted in earlier notions. Hegel talks a lot about the essential character of a nation, right? The Kabbalists, and in the Renaissance, Judah Lau of Prague, who made the famous golem, right? The famous, magical man, talks a lot about the kind of, irreducible essence of a nation. But we've kind of lost that, as I said when we began, because of its shadows. But maybe it's time to reclaim that, right? And I think that's what, when you talk about the United Arab Emirates, right, that's a big deal. So you're talking about a nation whose values that you've mapped using your tools, right, who is not a democracy, and yet you say are living democratic values, right? And for, in some sense, Richard, to democratic ears, that's shocking to hear, right? Like, really? What did he just say? It's like, it's shocking, right? And
it's very shocking. And not only that is that it's so shocking that you will try and deny it, you will try and challenge it, and of course we should. And I've been out to United Arab Emirates. I've been out there two or three times, and with this critical mind, no, this can't be true. And I think the same is, we could also say, the reason why we don't go with the same attitude towards Bhutan is because we recognize in Bhutan, where the king said, look, we're going to have a democracy, and the people said, well, why the hell do we want a democracy when we've got such a good king? There we say, oh, okay, well, maybe, they don't have such a bad press rap, and we say in Bhutan, yeah, no, look at it. And here's the key. The people of Bhutan operate from a spiritual Buddhist culture which permeates their whole cultural upbringing. And so what I also found in the United Arab Emirates is that the Muslim tradition of respect for each other is very, very, very strong. And so whether you look at the culture of United Arab Emirates through the eyes of the people, the Emirati, or through the eyes of the guests, the people working there, it looks exactly the same. And so this is very challenging to us who believe that the pathway to the future is democracy, because all I see is democracy being hijacked by powerful elites in America, the rich elites, and hijacked in the United Kingdom by the privileged establishment, as represented by the House of Lords. And we've had this idea of democracy hijacked in a way, and we need to reinvent democracy. That's my feeling. Anyhow, back to you, Marc.
Yeah, no, great. I mean, we need to reinvent democracy, right? And we need to reinvent democracy with unique self, right? With the purpose search, right? With democracy being forced to confront.
Yeah, so that's exactly the point I wanted to get to. Sorry, Marc, I got so much on the So what I really see, the key to this what is the nation about and what should the nation be doing? If we look at the nation and the individuals as on an evolutionary journey, then the key to a successful nation is supporting individuals in their individuation and self-actualization, which gets right to your point, is moving towards the activation of their unique self. Because if sufficient critical mass of people can individuate and self-actualize in a nation, then we will have a very, very different culture. And also democracy will change. Don't forget, democracy is really just a new experiment that came online about 100, well, for women it didn't even arrive less than 100 years ago. So democracy, in terms of the evolution, 14 billion years of evolution, is a pretty new thing. Even in terms of Homo sapiens, it's a pretty new thing. We're experimenting with it, and what we have seen is that if you allow privileged elites to be the masters in a democracy, they will still go on trying to satisfy their own self-interest unless they too individuate and self-actualize. And so it comes back to me to the question of a new leadership paradigm, a new set of leaders in our political establishments who operate from high levels of consciousness.
No, that's okay. So good. So let me pick it up there, Richard. That's great. And let me try and receive a piece of it and then kind of sharpen with you, another piece and see where we get. So if you say that the purpose of a democracy is, right, to facilitate, right, through its structures, the self-actualization, the unique selves, right, of its citizens, so I'm completely with you on that, and that would be a great step forward. That would be a major evolution of consciousness, right, in what a democracy is, meaning it not only assures, and I want to kind of really explicate it, it's not the old social contract, which simply assures their human rights. And when I say simply, that's of course that was a great momentous leap forward. But it's not merely that, right? Now, right, democracy is set up, its job is, right, to assure, right, or to facilitate the emergence of the unique self of every individual. So that's one major step forward. And, in the old kind of, let's say in the American system, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that key phrase from the founding documents, we now realize that happiness, right, is actually not pursuable, right? If you pursue happiness, it runs in the other direction, and happiness is a byproduct of actually living, self-actualizing into your unique self. So that's a big set of sentences, you and I together there, which would actually evolve dramatically the consciousness of social contract. Then we can then go the next step. And the next step is the realization that not only is the purpose of the democracy our first step, that is to say, to create the conditions, right, for the self-actualization, aka unique self-realization. And really, unique self is, at least in the Maslow's hierarchy, unique self is beyond self-actualization, because self-actualization can actually still take place at the level of ego or separate self. So I'm going to be kind of precise in the terms. Unique self is the level where I've actually realized, right, that I'm part of the larger context. I'm part of the seamless coat of the universe, as it were. I've realized, right, that I'm not separate from the all, and then I express my irreducible uniqueness as a function of that. It's actually beyond self-actualization, but we're referring to the same thing. So once that level is accomplished, then something deeper needs to happen, which is the new evolutionary we space created by these unique selves, which is called a nation, right, needs to realize its own character, right? And here, of course, that classical, idea made popular by, general dynamics theory, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, becomes, very apt and very, very true. There's the unique self of, right, there's the character of the Center for World Spirituality, of the Barrett Values Center, right, as an organization. There's the character of a country, right, which then has to be self-actualized, unique self, right, beyond, right, its job of providing a context for the actualization of unique self of its citizens. It needs to actually find its own, right, unique self, right? And in that, last point, and then back to you, in that, I would still say that the best choice in the world is democracy, and I'd maybe make a distinction, right, between, what our colleague and friend, borrow a distinction from our colleague and friend John Mackey, where John distinguishes between crony capitalism, and conscious capitalism. So there's, in some sense, crony democracy, right, and conscious democracy. We kind of assume that a democracy is conscious, but maybe we can kind of create a new term here, conscious democracy, where I'm not merely, in which the privileged elites, as you pointed out, right, don't become, that which seems to kind of define and hold the power. And there's this sense of kind of this general malaise and corruption, right, in the system, right, which leads to all of the cultural entropy that you were describing, for example, in Sweden, right, in the recent increases, right, which have been revealed by your mapping. So, a kind of conscious democracy is a democracy, A, which is awakening to its own unique self, and B, which recognizes its raison d'etre as being, its own unique self, and, right, the realization of the unique self of its citizens. Right? That's already a big leap forward. That's exciting.
Well, Marc, I got really excited when you made that differentiation between crony democracy and conscious democracy, because I'm aware of that distinction in the conversation around conscious capitalism. In fact, I'm having dinner with John Mackey tonight, immediately after this call. So I'm going to throw that one at him, because that'll be an interesting discussion. So I'm really excited by that idea, because that's exactly what I'm seeing in the world, is crony capitalism, crony democracy.
Democracy,
just
right.
We have this crony. Now, we have to be really, I don't understand the word crony sufficiently. It's not in my lexicon of words that I use often enough, so I need to dig deep into what the hell that means. But I got a vague, I have a vague understanding of what it means. But it means it's an impure form of something. And so crony democracy is an impure form, which seems to me suggests that people help each other who are within the leadership group, help each other to be successful rather than focus on the good of the whole.
Yeah, give me the last. Give me that. Right, crony would mean, that's right. Crony would mean, right, that I'm using the democracy, right, to further my own egoic goals, right,
that's
as
perfect.
a separate
Perfect.
self apart from the system. Right.
I think right there in this conversation, that is an emergence of something, that I think is really descriptive of what I am seeing in the world in our leading Western democracies. And that,
yeah,
I think,
that's exciting.
That's
exciting.
insight.
That's exciting. Yeah, that's exciting. And maybe the last thing is, and then Jessica, it sounds like you're about to jump in here, which is great. Is that so? We've defined two things. We've distinguished between a kind of crony democracy and a conscious democracy. We've distinguished, right, the point that you made, Richard, that a democracy needs now to be the social contracts, not only, right, the rights of its citizens, right? But they're actualized unique selves, right? That it's raison d'etre, its purpose, its charter, right, is to commit to the unique selves of its citizens. And then finally, the third dimension, that it actually has to locate, right, the unique self of its own unique evolutionary we space. So that becomes, we've really kind of articulated. I'm actually getting quite excited about it. A kind of a vision of what does evolutionary democracy or what does evolutionary nationhood actually look like, right? What does the unique self of the nation look like? What is the transformation? What is this organizational transformation? So that's just wildly exciting. That's great.
I want to add one thing before we just hand back to Jessica, because I'm still looking at the data that we get and saying, wait a minute, I've got two nations here which are not democracies, which are outperforming Western democracies in every which way as far as social contract is concerned. I think we have to throw into this whole folder values-driven society. In the first conversation we had, I said that, the soul incarnates into the physical body to learn how to lead a values-driven life and a purpose-driven life within a three-dimensional physical reality. And so let us not forget that values-driven life is just as essential as a purpose-driven life. And, whether we call something a democracy or not, the key issue is, are they living the values that we say are necessary for democracy? In Love, Fear, and the Destiny of Nations, I set out those 7 values. They're freedom, equality, accountability, fairness, openness, transparency, and trust. And they go in that order because everyone builds on the next. And so I just want to add into this mix, even though we've not got to a conclusive point, that it's about living a values-driven, and I think that's the key to define what a conscious democracy is the living of those values, whereas chronic democracy will not live those 7 values.
Yeah, and Jessica, just one more second, we'll jump in. Or that kind of United Arab Emirates strange attractor, that you've brought into the conversation is completely interesting, and important, and let me just kind of in the style of, delightful trying to kind of dialectical clarification here, the greatness of a democracy is that its structure, embodies, certain values, right? It's at least at its core, it's values driven, at least to the extent of kind of core human rights, privacy, human dignity, the rule of law, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the kind of self-evident truths and inalienable rights, that took us, as you pointed out, I'm guessing cultural history, 100 to 200,000 years to come to, in terms of the overall flow of evolution to get to that great expression took us, billions of years. And we certainly don't want to go backwards. And the complexity of a United Arab Emirate or Bhutan kind of model is that it seems to be dependent, right, on the particular character, right, of the players. Is it a good king or a bad king? Which is much like the old feudal world.
I would put it much of the leadership, because I see the same situation in organizations. Right. The difference is, and here's maybe we have a kind of interesting point of, I wouldn't say disagreement, but of kind of creative tension here, right? Is that the advantage of a democracy is that it actually canonizes, what at least the desirable things are, and so, President Nixon, when he's doing Watergate spying, in the ultimate sense, gets removed. That's the best, but there's a scandal in Great Britain, and in the House of Lords, so the Lords are held accountable, to a standard, right, that everyone recognizes. And so what I don't know, this is a genuine question mark, Richard, and I don't know what the internal mechanisms are, right, that assure or at least, give the best assurance possible of a sustainable, values-driven society, right, in a country that doesn't have, right, ensounced in law, right, democratic values. So that's a real question, which I offer as a question mark. And I've got a one-line answer to that, and which, look, we're going to have to end here, but the one-line answer is because they have full-spectrum leaders.
Okay, so we're going to have to talk about that.
Leaders, I mean a leader who can operate at each of the 7 levels of consciousness appropriately at the appropriate time in the appropriate situation. Anyhow, let's get back. Marc,
we'll get back to this. We'll get back to this. This is great. Jessica.
Yes, this is really exciting, and I want to start moving into the exercise so that the participants listening at home can really start to feel their personal connection to this discussion. So, Marc, I want to invite you to start laying out the exercise to move into.
Okay, fantastic, Jessica. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually make up a little bit of a new exercise. We have an exercise that we prepared, but there's a spontaneous exercise that's emerging right in me in this moment that I'm going to kind of go with and maybe incorporate it into the exercise. So with everyone's permission, please, Richard, you ducking in there?
Yeah.
Did you want to say something? I'm sorry. Did I interrupt you?
No, I don't want to say anything.
So here's the spontaneous emergent exercise kind of coming up, kind of right now. So first we'll ask everyone to take out a piece of paper. That was still in the earlier exercise. So it's great to have everyone. I can't go through all the names, but some of them I recognize, some of them I don't. It's just really great to see everyone and great to be together on a Saturday morning here in Carmel, California, and I guess later in the Saturday afternoon right there in Great Britain, and I see some people from Holland. I see a person from Israel, and it's great to see everyone. So I'm going to ask you to answer for yourself, right, a list of questions. Here's the first question. Question 1. Do you experience yourself as part of a nation? That's the first question. Right? Do you experience yourself as part of a nation? And what I mean by that question is not technically do you live someplace, but let's say, I see someone from Holland. Do you experience yourself as Dutch, in a meaningful way? Do you experience yourself as British in a meaningful way? Right? In other words, is being part of a nation for you a technicality, or do you actually experience yourself as being part of a nation? Right? Or let me phrase the question even a little better, and this is a spontaneous exercise. Right? Is being part of a nation an essential part of your identity? That's the way to say the question. That's better. Okay, so that's question 1. Is being part of a nation an essential part of your identity? That's question 1. We'll just take a minute or two just to write the answer to that question. Right? Is being part of a nation an essential part of your identity? Then question 2, if it is, why? And just write, a line or two. Just your kind of your initial thoughts. And if it's not, why not? Right? So if being part of a nation is an essential part of your identity, why is that so? What does that mean to you? Right? And if it's not, if being part of a nation is not an essential part of your identity, well then, why not? That's question 2. Question 3, and then when we finish filling out the exercise, we're then going to move into a bunch of dyads, groups of 2, to actually kind of share our conclusions with each other. Then we'll come back into the larger room and invite people to share. And this is going to be, I think, completely fascinating. I think it's like a really important conversation. So question 3 is, this is assuming that you do view yourself as part of a nation. Okay? And assume that you do view yourself as part of a nation. What is the unique talent of your nation? That's question 3. What is the unique talent of your nation? Okay, and what you can do is, if you don't have immediate answers, just write the questions down and then discuss the questions in the dyad. So what might happen is you might fill out, kind of one-line answers to everything, or you might actually pick the questions you want to discuss together, right, in the dyad. That was question 3. What's the unique talent of your nation? Question 4. What are your nation's unique value contributions? Or better said, what are your nation's unique values? What are your nation's unique values? Question 4. What are your nation's unique values? Again, first thought, best thought. Number 5, is a big one. Right? What is the unique need your nation can address in the world? Right? What is the unique need your nation can address in the world? Question 6. What is your nation's unique need? You see the difference? Right? Question 5 is, what is the unique need your nation can address in the world? Right? And question 6 is, what is your nation's unique need? Question 7, the final question. How does your unique self-talent align with your nation's unique self-mission? How does your unique self-talent align with your nation's unique self-mission? Last time, question 7. How does your unique self-talent align with your nation's unique self-mission? And I think everyone can already sense in the phone call kind of the leading edge nature, of this conversation. This is a conversation that just does not happen. It does not happen often. It doesn't happen in schools. It doesn't happen in churches, right? Just people don't think about this anymore, right? It just doesn't come up, right? Which is, I think, Richard and I are pointing to one of the core sources of cultural entropy. This very conversation just isn't happening.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I hope that went well for you, being in your partners discussing. So we'd like to open up the room now for the plenary discussion based on what you got out of that exercise. So if you have something you'd like to share or ask, now's the time to raise your hand by pressing the number 1 on your telephone keypad or your Skype dial pad. And we'll go around the room. We want to hear from you. So press 1 on your telephone keypad, and we will unmute you, and we'd love to hear from you. Also, if you have any questions that came out of that, but we want to hear, really what that was like for you. So I see Peter raising his hand. Hi, Peter.
Hello there. How are you?
Good. Nice to hear you.
Yeah. Well, we had my wife Joyce and we were in our own little dyad here together, and I'm obviously by my accent you can clearly know we live in Canada. I'm Scottish of origin. My wife is Canadian, and it was an exceptional opportunity for her and I to really reflect with each other how we individually feel about in these questions that we don't ask ourselves clearly often enough. And as we were kind of smiling coming towards the end there, I can see very clearly how when we're all done this call, we have a long drive tomorrow, and these are the questions that are going to be the topic of conversation on our drive. Because we recognized very quickly that we've just scratched the surface on a new area of dialogue for the two of us around this whole issue, and we're very fortunate in that we have our own copy of Love, Fear, and the Destiny of Nations right in our hands here, and how ticklish we were able to grin with each other. As part of the dialogue that we've been having, that Marc and Richard are having, that we are caused to embrace much of that languaging in the work that we do, and hearing it positioned this way, we get to take great permission from that to even enhance the dialogue even further, and that's what makes it really fun. But I'll pass it to Joyce, because sitting together, the virtual dyads are wonderful, but this was a really neat one where Joyce and I could actually sit and see each other's physical response to the questions and answers as well, and that was really fun. So here's Joyce.
Okay, thank you, Peter. I'll just quickly give you a brief rundown. I wrote down the questions, and as I was writing down the questions, I could answer them, and then we engaged in a discussion. For question 1, do you experience yourself as part of a nation or as an essential part of your identity? And Peter's answer was no, and mine was yes. And so we had a discussion about that, and he explained why, and it caused us to highlight our own values. And one of the second question, if you do, why? And mine was simply because as a Canadian, I felt that the value that Canada represented was accepting others, just being an accepting nation. And Peter echoed, well, that's a value, that's why he's here, because it is an accepting nation. And do I feel a part of a nation, and what is that unique talent? And I felt very much aligned with the unique talent of Canada, because I think at some points our leadership has embodied peacekeeping. I think of Lester B. Pearson, where he wanted to use soldiers for war, not for war, but for peacekeeping. So I was very proud of our country doing that, or that leadership. And I just felt like our unique values of this nation were acceptance and openness. And I felt aligned with that, and that's why Peter said, that's why I'm here. So what we needed...
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you have more there? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, I was just going to just make a summary comment. I realized we've taken a bit of time, but what I felt that we needed in our nation was full spectrum leadership, because we haven't lived up to that role of peacekeeping and that profile. We've witnessed the scandals in our own government, and your comments earlier that we heard are very apt and resonate with us. That's all. I'm all done now.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, I see we have a hand raised from Sally Lee. Hi, Sally.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I was having some trouble connecting, obviously, because I didn't get into a dyad, so I thought, well, I'll just speak to the group then. And I have that feeling about being a part of the United States. I'm an American. That it doesn't occur to me that I really identify as an American. I think I identify as more a global citizen. It doesn't occur to me until I'm elsewhere, outside the United States. And I'm observing other cultures or interacting with other cultures, and I am able to see my American frame of how I see reality. And I realize that it is a very particular cultural frame. And then that's when I identify as an American. And when Richard was talking earlier about our values, not American values, but nation-state values, and the importance of that in reaching self-actualization of a nation, one of the things that I think is boggling up democracy, whether in the U.S. or anywhere in the Western world, or maybe anywhere on the planet, is that in the U.S. at least, the development of democracy got very bound up with the capitalistic market economy. And they seem to be almost inextricable one from another in terms of our thinking and our values. And our capitalistic market economy, in my view, the number one value of that, not a democratic value, but a capitalistic market economy value, is you can do anything to advance your own well-being, happiness, power, wealth, if you can get away with it. And in fact, if you're very, very clever and cunning, that's a sign of intelligence. And so that's a very strongly held value. that goes along with being individualistic, but the democratic value of individual pursuit of happiness. But it's deeper. It's like the shadow side of that, because you've got a clear playing field, and so I think we're constantly battling the Lockean social contract with the more Hobbesian, we're always at war with one another kind of way of thinking of, I have to protect myself, defend myself, and win. And I think it's very confused, and that's one of the potential shifts in democracy is to disentangle those somewhat so that we're able to see them somewhat differently. And just one more thing, that in terms of what the U.S., our unique self and what we offer is, I think we offer this incredible, optimistic, open can-doism. And we say to everyone who gets here, go for it. You can do it. And the shadows, that's both our biggest strength and our weakness, because we say, anything you can figure out how to do, you should be able to do it. And no one should be able to get in your way. And that clashes with the smooth running of a society. And the thing that I think the U.S. most needs in terms of learning is to reframe reality, to reframe into realizing that we all don't have to agree with one another, that we're going to be that we learn to go past tolerance of one another to appreciating the multiplicity of our nation and of the world, and understanding that we're not going to see things the same way without saying you need to change and going into polarity. So that's it from me.
That's great.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you. And I see that we have Debbie who has her hand raised as well. Hi, Debbie.
Is this Debbie in London? I trust so. So I'm Canadian, living in London, been here 30 years, and love. Thank you, Sally, for your comments, and thank you to Joyce and Peter, was it, in Canada, for yours. I'm feeling I'm feeling confused in some ways as to whether because I still hold a Canadian passport very proudly, and yet I've chosen to live in dear London. And I think some of those elements are related to one that I would be bringing to both, the pioneering element, I'll say, of Canada, the tolerance piece that I really picked up that you've said also, Joyce, of Canada, but that I've really picked up while being in London. And there's something about being here that is related to a sense of leadership of what this city and country has been and is or could be in the world. And I guess I have a passion for bringing a form of change to financial services world, and if that can happen from here, great. I had a fascinating conversation with Monique, who's from France, and we were really looking at my perspective as an outsider to France was on the revolution element of what France can bring the world, and hers was on the element about engineering, that what it is right now, and we had a conversation between the head and the heart and how each needs to come into play going forward to reduce extremism in the world and yet be in balance. And I don't know, Monique, if you could pick up from here just to carry on, because I thought it was a really fascinating conversation. We spent most of the time on France.
Interesting.
Yes, hello.
Hi, Monique.
Hi. Yes, we had a very interesting conversation. I must say more about France than about Canada because obviously my partner didn't know exactly where she belonged. But yes, what I was saying about the revolution and the value of liberty, of freedom, for example, the value of freedom, I was feeling that it was not so much a success to need a revolution to get the freedom. And I thought that maybe having more the value of dialogue, of sharing, could avoid to pass through a revolution to get the freedom. And then at the end of the conversation, we came to the point of the heart, heart and head, and obviously France is more on the side of the head and need more heart and more courage, but not to do revolution, just to listen to others, to be more tolerant, and to be more active, more entrepreneur, something like that, So
Thank
it was
you,
so
Monique.
interesting.
Thank you, Monique and Debbie. And I just want to open it now just to Marc and Richard because we only have a couple minutes left. So I just want to hear any closing remarks or reflections back to the group from Marc and Richard.
Do you want me to go first, Marc? Yes, okay,
please,
good.
please, sir.
Well, first of all, Marc, brilliant questions. Glad you changed our questions at the last minute, although some were the same. Great responses from people. I really felt as I was listening that it would be great, Marc, for you and I to have a whole day at this and have lots of people involved and get more input, because I think there's so much juice in all of this, so much insight, so much that we could do to move this idea forward before we actually, we were talking about doing a book on the unique self of the organization. I already have planned the unique self of the nation, not the unique self, but second volume of Love, Fear, and the Destiny of Nations. But there's something to do on this. I don't know what it is, but anyhow, that's all I'm going to say. Because over to you.
Yeah, no, and finishing here, and send love to John, and thank you everyone, for being with us. And I think that's right. I think unique self person, soul person, unique self nation, unique self corporation really brings a new emergent into the conversation. I think absolutely we need to really do everything we can to create context for deep, great conversation about this, so that it then emerges in all the ways that it needs to. And I am delighted to be in this conversation with you, Richard, and thank you everybody. Both on Richard's side and our side, and thank you every single unique self guest, and have a great and gorgeous day, everyone, as this unfolds together. It's just nothing more delightful than to participate in the evolution of consciousness as it happens. I can think of no greater privilege and delight. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Marc and Richard, for a great event today, and thanks for everyone's participation. You'll be receiving an email after this webinar with a feedback survey. We'd love to hear from you about this call and about this series. And we can also keep the line open after the call for you to stay in your group, your partner, if you'd like to continue sharing the conversation. That's completely available. And if you weren't in a dyad like Sally, we'll make sure you are in one if you are staying on the line to continue. So thank you everyone for today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.